And we are live. So welcome everyone to the School of Professional Development ongoing video series. This week we are really thrilled. Rob, I'll let you do the introduction to our wonderful guests here, our panelists. But the title of today is Taking Action Across Boundaries, a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Highly relevant topic, probably the most relevant topic we'll discuss in this series. We're really thrilled to have everybody here. Thank you, the attendees rolling in as we speak here. Thrilled to have everyone here. This series is really an ongoing series to highlight some of the great things that we're doing at the School of Professional Development, but more importantly, highlighting some of the folks that are involved with the School of Professional Development, particularly today in the Higher Education Administration program. So we have some great experts in this space and doing a lot of wonderful things with the students and beyond. It's my pleasure actually to introduce Dr. Rob Mangione, who is the head of the Higher Education Administration program. And Rob, I'll let you do the introduction of these wonderful panelists, and we'll get into some great conversation after that. Rob?
I appreciate the warm welcome, Al. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. We appreciate that you've joined us today for this webinar. As the faculty director of the Higher Education Administration program, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Christina Vargas and Marilyn London, both of whom serve as program faculty and as professionals in the field. Thank you, Chris and Marilyn, for offering to discuss the importance of taking action across boundaries. Would you please take a few moments to introduce yourselves to everyone? You would do a far better job than me.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I thank you so much for having us, and thank you so much, all the participants, for being here today. I'm Christina, and I'm a product of Stony Brook. I'm a person who went to undergraduate and graduate school at Stony Brook and eventually made my career here and wonderfully made it to the path of being in the Higher Education Administration program as a faculty member, teaching the diversity in higher education course. I just want to say that, I'm the CDO of Suffolk County Community Colleges, which is the Chief Diversity Officer and the Title IX Coordinator. And so we deal with all the issues and strategies around diversity, equity, and inclusion for the largest community college in New York State. And I spent quite a chunk of my career here at Stony Brook working with faculty, staff, and students on multicultural issues, on diversity issues. And lastly, I'll say I also have a passion for diversity and social justice. I'm on the board of a group called Erase Racism, which deals with segregation on Long Island and the nonprofit areas of housing and education. And lastly, I was the first person of color to be the president of Stony Brook's Alumni Association. So I'm a diehard Seawolf, and I definitely support all things Stony Brook. So thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Marilyn London. I'm really honored to be here, to be able to be on the same panel as Christina. I've been working at Stony Brook for over 20 years. I've been in the School of Professional Development since the 1990s, and in higher education, I'm currently teaching the leadership class. I actually have retired from a position in the School of Medicine, and I worked there and in health technology and management for many years. And over that time, I was participating in the STEP program, and I also was a mentor. And of course, I've worked for students for many, many years. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope we have a good, lively discussion today.
Great, thank you so much, Rob.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for those introductions. Al and I appreciate that you both bring unique perspective to this conversation. But Chris, let me start with you, right? I guess the question I have is, why now? What is the rationale behind having this diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation today?
So, I think this has been at the tip of all the work and at the forefront of everyone's minds for at least the last year, given what's been happening in the world and what's happening happened in the United States around racial unrest and the expectations around having conversations about race, I will say that that's a pleasant development, because over the last 25 years that I've been in this work, I've seen so much change in terms of the level of conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher ed. It started off by kind of talking about opportunities and equal access and the pipeline for faculty, staff, and student achievement and student success. And it's still there, but now we're also talking about students, faculty, and staff being in the fabric of decision-making, feeling totally included, being part of the conversation around spaces and places on campus, feeling treated fairly, being fully, present and having conversations around what the policies and practices are, and actually honoring and seeing people for who they are and bringing all of those identities to the table. So why now? I mean, if we don't do this now, we're actually remiss in kind of achieving the mission at the college or university that we work in, or even for Stony Brook. Of course, this is about, the place that brings diversity to our own community surrounding the university, and is really at the forefront of conversations for many decades around how to be the best place we can be to ensure that students' voices are heard and that we actually retain faculty and staff in a really positive way. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that this week alone, we've had so many decisions that personally affect us, right? We've been dealing with the aftermath of the Chauvin trial. We've been dealing with anti-racism and hate in the Asian American community, for example. Over the last several years, there's been concerns about hate in Muslim communities and in LGBTQ and transgender communities. And so to be able to be timely and nimble and think about these issues intentionally and how they impact the climate for all of us is really, really important and part of our passion. I think that's why we're here, because we care about these issues so much and we care about our students.
Thank you, Christina. Marilyn, would you like to add anything to that question?
I think what Christina said is right on the mark. I just want to add that we have to remember, if we want students to have the outcomes that we expect, and we want to have equitable treatment and move towards all of these changes, that we really have to have very serious conversations that take us out of our own comfort zones. And it's a core value of Stony Brook to address diversity. And so we have to move forward. And doing this, I think, takes us out of our armchair position. It kind of peels away a layer of the barriers we're experiencing and enables us to have actions that are just more appropriate and moving in the right direction.
So that actually leads really well into the next question. And Christina, you mentioned this coming off the Chauvin trial too. What do we hope to accomplish? And there's timing of this too, right? There's, you almost not leverage, but you almost want to make sure that it doesn't end with just a quick decision in a trial, right? You want to continue the conversation. So Marilyn, I'll direct this to you first, and then Christina, please chime in. What do we hope to accomplish, and what do we risk by being silent and not talking about these things, Marilyn? So Marilyn may be frozen. Not sure. So Christina, we'll go to you first in the hopes that Marilyn can come back in. All right.
I think, I've seen the range of emotions from my colleagues and friends over the last week or two as we were anticipating this verdict, number one. And I'll tell you that, we have an opportunity really to deal with some issues directly head on and take some risks that maybe we wouldn't be willing to take before, because this is such a painfully obvious example of what we need to do to think about structural racism and reform and the impact on communities and the way that individuals are treated in systemic ways, right? So I think part of this is, really trying to have transparency in discussions, authenticity in discussions, for us to really feel that we're heard in this process. And I've seen some of the most amazing opportunities at this point, while we have colleagues actually interacting with one another, hearing the impact of this work and of what's happening in society on their current work and how they're interacting in their workplaces, how they're interacting with their students. And actually, you know, beyond that, this is about our lives. This is about who we are. This is about our families, our friends, like navigating how we're going to deal with this personally and professionally. Can we have healthy boundaries of how much we share and when we share it with our colleagues? And I think, you know, life circumstances have you in different places of readiness and willingness to have those conversations, right? So the question is, how do we actually engage with folks, giving them a space to start a conversation, a place to really listen to people, and then an opportunity to share in a way that's meaningful and that sustains some change. And I think that's why we wanted to have this conversation, because it's really like a journey. It really is taking steps one piece at a time to kind of get there. And I'm worried that we lost Marilyn, sorry.
Yeah,
like she bounced out of here.
I'm hoping she'll
She'll
come back
probably
in.
log right back in.
Yeah, hoping she'll come back in. She should just be able to pop right back in. I'll work in the background. But a follow-up while I do that piece, Christina, I mean, this is obviously a very polarizing issue. And while if we go back to the Chauvin trial, it was, in my mind, a victory, right? A really, a positive. But in others, it's not, right? So how do you, at what level do you hope to accomplish sort of getting through to the folks that need to be part of the conversation and brought to a certain level? I'll say, like, what are the expectations, I guess, around this, and what do we really hope to accomplish, knowing that it's such a polarized issue? I wish it wasn't. I think a lot of us wish it wasn't, but it is. So what do you like? What could we accomplish by a lot of the work that you're doing already moving forward? And I'll work on Marilyn in the background too. All right.
Sure. I think this has been kind of the priority for most chief diversity officers across the country right now, figuring out how to frame conversations at their institutions, working with faculty, because most of the time, faculty are concerned about building the capacity in the classroom to have difficult dialogue, right? These are everyone does bring an opinion to the table. Everyone does bring their background and experience to the table. And in some cases, it's much more broad. And in other cases, it's very narrow and limited and maybe coming from one particular source or another. So the first step, I think, is just recognizing that there are different perspectives and the different points of view, but there are also perspectives that need to be courageously brought to bear around issues of justice, issues of anti-racism, issues of anti-oppression, systemic issues, historical issues, and that there are contexts to these issues. So, for example, you know, a few people are here from my class, but one of the things I always try to do is think about framing things in a way that helps people ground it in the expectations on their research, scholarship, and a real historical context. And also to not just think about individual choices and situations, but to think about systems. And once you start to put it in the perspective of this is not just an isolated situation, this is about an ongoing series of situations that impact a specific identity, race, community, background, experience, folks can start opening their eyes and being willing to listen, I think is the huge piece of this, right? And it's also being patient. These conversations are hard, like super difficult. They take, they take time to unfold. It takes trust. We have to be aware of power dynamics. Like in the classroom, we need to recognize, we are faculty and administrators. It's a really different dynamic. And are we learning as much from our students as they share stories with us as we are in terms of sharing our experiences and the literature and all of the documentation and the foundation for this work with them? If it's not a reciprocal relationship, we're missing something. So I think part of the polarizing conversation piece too is really just understanding that there's always a larger context at work. There is a how do I say this? There's like a whole system of ways that these arguments and issues are framed. And so we need to make sure we're framing them and reframing them and considering more and adding more to that conversation. And it should always be additive and as we're going through this process. And I think that's what makes for a good conversation. It's kind of stepping back and leaning in at the same time.
Chris, if you don't mind, I've been listening to what you're saying, and Marilyn has sent me a message in the interim saying that her internet has dropped and she's trying to connect as quickly as possible. It looks like she's joining us now.
Yes, yes. thankfully, yes.
So I think what I'll do then is instead of interjecting now, I do have a question based on listening to you speak, but maybe we'll give Marilyn an opportunity to speak before I ask my question, because she may add additional perspective.
Welcome back. Sorry.
Yeah. So, Marilyn, just to reiterate, technology is fun, right? Sometimes, or not. The question that Christina just addressed was, what do we hope to accomplish? And what do we risk by being silent? So if you want to add to that at all, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And appreciate you regathering yourself. I know it was probably hectic back there getting on back on the computer. But what do we hope to accomplish with all of this? And what is, I know you have strong feelings, we've talked offline on the what do we risk by being silent, not talking about this?
Right. I think that we risk not moving to action. That's really the biggest risk. When we had our conversations, I talked a lot about having empathy and developing empathy so that we could move ourselves to action. I used some of Goleman's ideas of cognitive empathy and emotional empathy and empathic concern, and how those are steps that we go through as we learn and change our behaviors. And so, first of all, I think we have to grow more self-aware. And of course, I'm very self-aware on this panel. I feel very humbled. And as I said, I do feel honored that you've asked me to come on. I think that we have to discover our own implicit biases and address them, which many times can be very uncomfortable. And I had this idea of vector behavior, which I had talked about, which is basically just like a mathematical or science vector, where things approach where you want to go. We can't become the other, but we can certainly begin to have empathy and to better understand so that we can reach action and we can reach out. And listening and being a part of conversations is extremely important, but listening is not a passive behavior. You don't just sit back and listen. You have to get involved. You have to ask questions in order to learn and to become part of the change. I hope that's what you were talking about, because
Yeah,
I
it is.
could not hear
Absolutely
your
is.
conversation.
It absolutely is.
Definitely.
So, Rob, we'll go to you with the next question. Go ahead.
Sure. And, Marilyn, I really appreciate your thoughts here. I believe that they follow very well after what Chris was discussing, even though you could not be fully aware of that based on the technological constraints. I'll mention two things here. Dr. Al Pisano teaches technology in higher education, and I think he is doing an excellent job in real time of managing the flow of various constraints. That may seem like a disconnected statement, but to me, it's connected because what both Chris and Marilyn have mentioned here, in my view, connects to certain student development theories that might be common in a higher education classroom. It might also be almost second knowledge for a practitioner scholar in academic affairs or student affairs. But, and Chris, maybe I'll ask you first, because that was my intention before Marilyn rejoined. There is sometimes a disconnect between an understanding of theory and a comfort in practice. So with this in mind, when is the right time to start this conversation? Because I'm not sure it's always an easy decision to engage. And I believe that I would benefit and the audience would benefit from your insight.
Thank you so much. So, we've been spending a lot of time at the college having conversations with faculty about this readiness. Right? Like, it's difficult when something happens in the world and all of a sudden, if you haven't even thought about how to incorporate potential topics, issues, concerns, difficult dialogues into your class discussions, how that might automatically just make an appearance, right? At this point, it'll seem kind of random and out of place and potentially awkward and not authentic. And that is the last thing the faculty member in this space would want to do. They would absolutely want to make sure that people are feeling that they're going to be engaging and heard in this process. And you're also trying to facilitate those perspectives and point of view. again, grounded in the academic work of the class. So what I would say to you is, part of this is starting off at the very beginning, in the whole pedagogical process of looking at how you create guidelines and expectations for the discussion of the course, and how you will incorporate potential issues into the course, and how you actually hear the voices of your students in the process. So, for example, like listening respectfully is a really important skill that leads to what Marilyn was talking about in terms of empathy, right? This idea that you would think about how you engage small group dialogue and breakout rooms in Zoom, for example. Speaking of the technology, the breakout room idea is super effective if you can get people to really understand what that room's purpose and how you can kind of get there. And I would say you also have to start off with a great deal of self-reflection. To Marilyn's point, the way you build empathy is also to have a very important sense of self-awareness around how these actual issues impact you, and to share information, tidbits, experiences, your reactions, not in a way that crosses boundaries or is harmful to students, but in a way that actually honors that student and in a way that actually benefits students and learning, can make all the difference in making that connection. So you don't want to share to the point of the person worrying about you, right? This doesn't become a conversation about my reaction to something that's happening in the world at the expense of the students' learning. But it does become a very important opportunity for you to prepare ahead of time, even if it's right before class, even if it's months before class, to anticipate that there will be something. There is always something. I hate to say it to you, once you enter the space, the biggest piece of feedback I get from our students is that I wasn't thinking about that before. Now, everywhere I go, I see this, because of that awareness all of a sudden permeates throughout their lived experience, and they can't help but see it in common experiences in every class and in day-to-day life, headed to the grocery store, going to the supermarket, right? They all of a sudden notice distinctions and differences. So I say it's two things. One is authenticity, preparedness, and willingness to take that risk, but really preparing to ask the right kinds of questions.
Marilyn, your thoughts as well? When is it relevant to start the conversation?
I really think it's relevant when the issues come up again. And I think that there are many ways that we can enter into those conversations. We do have to be very prepared. But, I just want to bring us back a minute. We have to think about who we're talking to, who we're having the conversations with. And in order to do that, we have to get to know who our students are. And I think that creating learning experience, like Christina said, you have to be prepared ahead of time. And so one of the things that I do is I create active learning environments in my classes, even the online classes, or especially them, so that I watch students interact, especially on Zoom. It's kind of fun. They're all sitting there right in front of you on the screen, and having them solve problems. How a student solves a problem really tells you a lot about how they're thinking and what kinds of experiences they've had. I like having them write journal reflections and express how what they're learning affects their real lives. And all of these things kind of lead you into discussions in the classroom to learn other things about students. I mean, I ask them, what are your hobbies? What are you reading about? I want to find out who they are, because that helps. It gives me clues how to get their attention and how to set up the learning environment so that I show them that I value the variety that they're bringing to class, and I'm finding ways for them all to interact with the environment.
So that again leads right into this next question. I think you answered a little bit of this, Marilyn, but feel free to add more, and Christina, chime in. And I would love to get to Christina. You use the term, hopefully fits in here, this journeyed allyship, which I love the term, and I think it speaks to this so well. Everything that I'm hearing so far which ironically has this inclusive piece to it, and involving all stakeholders, which I'm learning from as I speak to both of you. So I appreciate that. So Marilyn, to go along a little bit with the thoughts that you were just talking about, how do we frame and have these conversations so that colleagues and students feel safe, they feel comfortable, because it's not an easy thing for those that, whether you're sort of an outsider or an insider, whatever perspective you have, like how do you make it safe for everyone to have these conversations? And I think you described some of that already, some of the lessons that you do in the classroom, but can you elaborate on that? And then Christina, please add in.
I guess to some extent, you're never really safe. I don't want to give the impression that I'm walking into this having an answer. I don't. I think that we all feel that it's at some level we put ourselves at risk by putting our ideas and ourselves out there. One of the things that I did this semester in my leadership class, number one, I try to bring a sense of humor into it. And I try to invite my students to do that as well. But one of the things I did this semester was I brought in the idea that I'm writing a book that's called Emma's Garden. And I told them about the book. It's a dystopia story, and it creates an environment in which a diverse population is thrown together in adverse circumstances, and it has to survive. It's a community that has to survive. It's not unlike a university setting where people from all over come to live and work and learn. The difference, of course, in my book is that it's fiction, and people don't have a choice about their whereabouts. Their characters plopped in to the story. And so I talked about the story to my class, and I asked them, is it okay? Is it okay that I put all of these people, they're very diverse, and they interact with each other, and some of the interactions cause other people to do other things, and their responses push the storyline along. And in this way, I'm learning to read and research and talk to people and learn about different people's different worldviews. And I'm putting them upon my characters and watching what happens. And so in the story, resilience is something that's very important and very difficult. And having a microcosmic version of the world where diversity really, lives depend on its success, takes us back to what Christina was saying. In our real world, our success dealing with diversity is going to very much affect how our world goes on and how we do as a culture and a population. So, this is one of the things. I took a big risk bringing this into my classroom, and I had lots of responses, and we had great conversations. And so I think any time is the right time if you think about who you're talking with and try to engage them from where they're coming. And I did actually say to them, well, what's your point of view? If you were in the story, what would you think? Where is this going? People felt comfortable, people felt uncomfortable, and I think that's important. Like Christina said, it's not about me, the author. It's really about the characters in the story. It's about all of us at the university working together and making it succeed. And to do that, you have to find out who the players are, how they're playing against one another, and what their views are.
Christina, to you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that, Marilyn. I think, part of taking that risk is acknowledging kind of a few things right at the beginning of that conversation. And that is, one, just saying it out loud that these are tough conversations, because number one, a lot of folks are not conditioned to even start the conversation themselves. And I think there's an expectation, being a faculty member of color with a Latinx background, people might expect me to start the conversation, but would they expect Marilyn to start the conversation as a woman who is white and who has a certain background? So we just have to acknowledge that, just to say it out loud. I think there's an expectation of how people receive that conversation depending on who we are and our own identity, right? That's the first piece. That takes courage, right? It takes acknowledgement. It takes kind of naming the issue. And that's what we've, I think, been reluctant to do in higher ed. We've kind of glossed over the conversation around diversity by saying it's diversity, right? Diversity is fun, diversity is nice, we all benefit from diversity. But there are also conversations underneath the conversation around representation related to inclusion and equity that are about justice, that are about fairness, that are about the way that we treat each other, that are about a historical series of issues of harassment and discrimination. And that makes people uncomfortable, right? Nobody wants to talk about the bad stuff, right? Nobody wants to talk about the impacts, the consequences. So just acknowledging that, hey, this is going to be hard, this is going to be uncomfortable, and going there and reminding people that we're not trying to make people feel uncomfortable for uncomfortable sake. We are trying to learn from these experiences, from these issues, and really push through them to benefit our own growth and development. Because now we're seeing things from a very new lens, and that incorporates our work and our practice. When we start to think about how then we can incorporate that into our daily lived experience, in our work life, in our careers, in our classrooms, in our relationships, it might not go smoothly, but the idea is that we're still going to benefit from the conversation itself. And I think that's the tough part of this. It's taking the risk to start with. And sometimes we pass. That's okay too. Sometimes you need to say, this is not the time. Maybe we wait. And I'll give you an example from a situation I dealt with just yesterday that I couldn't have given a week ago, right? We've been pulling together informal dialogues at my college to try to engage faculty and staff together, and informal dialogues with students together. And there were a number of faculty who said they're not sure how to respond, right? This is so hard. They're not sure what to say. They don't want to say the wrong thing and not sound empathetic. They don't want to say the wrong thing and come across as cold or uninformed. And on the flip side, there are African-American or faculty of color who said to me, I just don't want to talk. I'm done. I'm tired. I don't even want to say anything either, because I'm not ready to say it, because it's so hard and it's so emotional and it's so personal, right? So you kind of have to figure out where you are in that space and strike that balance. And as Marilyn said, I 100% agree. This is about listening as much and receiving as much as it's giving in that process, from a really tough, informed perspective, I think.
Are there strategies? Because this conversation, obviously, as you alluded to and Marilyn alluded to, it could break down pretty fast.
Yes.
And get because of the personal nature of it, because of biases or where you are, if you've been affected by it. Like how do you stop it? And I know, Christina, I love that you said you get a feel for where it's at, and you keep that process like it's almost like a cyclical process. But how do you continue that conversation without having it break down into screaming and yelling, so to speak? Or like how do you do that? Because that's
I'm gonna say
a fear, right? That's a fear that it gets to that point, right?
I gotta tell you, the first time I had to facilitate a diversity workshop, that was my worst fear. It's like everybody's gonna start fighting, right? Like everybody's going to the conflict is going to escalate so quickly that it's done. Somebody's going to walk out of the room. Somebody's going to get so offended that they're going to report you. Like there's all kinds of questions around what's going to happen, right? I think you start off by doing a few things really clearly. One is you have to set the boundaries around respectful behavior. And that means a collective conversation about what respect means in that space. It's not respect is automatically given or received. It's what do we mean to treat in this space with this group of people? What does respect mean to us? And how are we going to engage in respectful behavior? And in some cases, that might be about a raised voice or about a way of using certain language. And other times, we also have to remind people, and I say this in my class all the time, is that there's a lot of unintentional offense. And so how do we assume that people are well-intended, and that if they use language that might be kind of out of place or not inclusive, can we create a way to help let people know that, hey, and sometimes we use that technique of ouch, you just stepped on my foot, you just messed up. Can you pause for a second? Because you need to understand what you just said really hit me in a specific way. And that can kind of interrupt the conversation and have somebody build some self-awareness to say, oh, wait a minute, I think I need to reframe, and maybe I need to say something a little differently. So it's kind of the pacing of that conversation becomes patience. Sometimes you have to intervene as the facilitator, as the teacher, as the professor, for sure. You have to stop, behavior that's harmful. You have to, interrupt behavior where it's necessary. You have to be willing to kind of take charge of that conversation and reframe a conversation, paraphrase where necessary. But you should let the conversation happen. And sometimes that conflict matters. right? I haven't watched the new Real World, but the Real World has one of the most famous scenes of all television history where they were having these hard conversations about race and yelling at the top of their lungs between a Black male and a white female. And this idea was like, wait a minute, they're fighting. Well, some of it is because they're passionate and they're also trying to figure out how to figure out the conversation, right? And the consequences of that conversation was like TV history. We don't really want TV history in our classes. We really do want it to be a civil, productive environment. But I think we need to think about the fact that sometimes you have to have the hard conversation that's pretty direct, and that might be uncomfortable for some.
Absolutely.
Marilyn, anything to add to that thought?
And not a whole lot. I mean, when we did discuss, some of these things in my class, I did lay it on the line in terms of saying, I'm taking a risk. I don't know the answers. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to hear your response, your feedback. What are you thinking? How does this work for you or not work for you? And frankly, and the other thing you can say is, what's said in the classroom stays in the classroom, and hopefully people will honor that. But I think also taking the viewpoint, one of the things I told them is think about being an archaeologist. You go into the field, you find tools and pottery and pieces of evidence that people lived in a certain place at a certain time. And from picking up these little tiny clues, you make these giant assumptions about what a civilization might have been like. And of course, archaeologists get it right, they get it wrong, they have to go back, they have to study more. We're really in the same situation. And in a way, I consider myself an armchair anthropologist. I'm not out in the field. I'm not a woman of color, but I'm trying to get to know more by using ethnomethodology in a sense. I'm asking questions. I'm putting things out that do create risk and do create conversation and discussion. And I'm listening and I'm trying to learn and change the way I do things and the way I write based on what I hear. And I think if we use our students to help reflect, what is it they're feeling? What have they experienced? How is this affecting their time in college and in life? I think we're doing this vector behavior type thing. We're getting closer, but it is a process. It's not going to end. We're not going to jump the hurdle and all of a sudden we're the other person. You're never the other person. So worldviews, that whole concept, we have to talk. We have to see what's happening and how we're all seeing it happen, because we can't take the next step until we do these conversations. So I think that's why today was important for me. I think a webinar like this, I'm hoping, will lead to future conversations and discussions, and we can all learn more. And
Well said, Marilyn. Yeah. So as we wrap up here, I do want to turn one last question. This is a curveball. We didn't have this on our docket, but the piece, and because I think it ties us together really well. Christina, to you, you spoke about journeyed allyship. What does that mean for the audience? Because I think it really encapsulates what we're trying to do collectively, what we hope that everybody it will do moving forward. To Marilyn's point, hopefully it doesn't stop here. And then Rob, will turn it over to you to close out.
Oh, thank you so much. I think, there's been a lot of talk of allyship in the last 10 years, right? As an individual is an ally, and that ally is a noun. I am an ally, right? And so for me, this issue is who gets to define what that means, right? And so as a heterosexual, cisgender female, I can say I'm an ally, but if I'm not behaving and acting in ways that honors and understands transgender and LGBTQ communities, they could give me the look like, you're not there yet, right? And then the same issue with color or race. I mean, I self-identify as Afro-Latina, but I'm not a dark-skinned African-American person like my son, right? And so, he gets to decide, am I aligned with the values and the work? So the journey for me is about the ongoing work that we all need to do as we explore our identities and our relative ways that we interact with each other. And it's a journey, because as new issues come up, as new terminology comes up, as expectations come up, as we listen to the communities that are impacted the most by the issues that we care about. If we're not listening to our students of color, for example, and African-American students in particular, Latinx students, Asian American students, Native American students, and we're not hearing the journeys that they're experiencing in the classroom environment at the university, then we're missing a mark. And that's a journey. That's understanding the new contemporary issues that happen weekly, semesterly, annually, for us to really get it. And that means it's never ending. It's a journey. It's a marathon. It's not necessarily who we are until we continue to ongoing do that cyclical work. And so I like to say journey because I hate to say that I'm an expert, and I hate to say I've arrived, right? I have a lot of experience and I've had a lot of conversations, but I still don't even consider myself an expert in all these issues, because there's no way you can absorb every single situation, identity, and community's experience.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I just want to thank behind the scenes, Amy and Kim helped make this happen. Rob, will turn it over to you to close. And of course, I think Rob would say Pat Malone, Commander-in-Chief, to making all this happen, giving the go-ahead to what's turning out to be a really awesome series, I think. Rob, to you.
Sure. And thanks, Al. I agree. It really does take a community of people working together to achieve most things. And we were all also grateful to you for offering to host and help with the technology. Chris and Marilyn, thank you for joining us from an open, authentic, and honest place to have this initial conversation. I know that there were a few questions posted, which I believe you've spoken to a bit. Thank you to those people who asked the questions. We will address these perhaps in a future conversation similar to this one. And we hope that this will be the first of many conversations on not only diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education, but also just about leadership and making a difference. This is a short period of time, and as we said, it's really only the first conversation. So if you have any questions about the Higher Education Administration Graduate Program, if you'd like to follow up with the presenters, or if you'd just like to know about future opportunities surrounding the School of Professional Development in Stony Brook, you are welcome to contact me directly, or you can also email the Higher Ed Administration Program at hea@stonybrook.edu. It is the best general means of contact because more than one person will look at that email and ensure that we connect you to the right individual. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
You all.